Good evening. This is a call to order for the January 8th, 2024 Canal Winchester Planning and Zoning meeting. Time in is 7 o'clock. Mr. Deeds, roll call, please.
Mr. Woldenthaler.
Here.
Mr. Donahue.
Here.
Ms. Gooden.
Here.
Ms. McDonald.
Here.
Mr. Deeds here. Mr. Paulsgrove.
Here.
I'd like to make a motion to excuse Mr. Ritchie.
So moved.
Motion made by Mr. Deeds.
Second.
Second by Ms. McDonald. Roll call.
Mr. Woldenthaler.
Yes.
Mr. Donahue.
Yes.
Ms. Gooden.
Yes.
Ms. McDonald.
Yes.
Mr. Deeds, yes. Mr. Paulsgrove.
Yes.
Now I'll need the approval for our December 11th, 2023 minutes, please.
I make a motion to approve the minutes for December 11th, 2023.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Paulsgrove, second by Mr. Wildenthaler. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Woldenthaler.
Yes.
Mr. Donahue.
Yes.
Ms. Gooden.
Yes.
Ms. McDonald.
Yes.
Mr. Deeds, yes. Mr. Paulsgrove.
Yes.
Now is the time for public comment. These would be for items that are not on our agenda this evening. If there's anybody that wishes to speak for items that are not on the agenda, now would be the time. Okay, if you will be speaking with us this evening in any capacity, if there's any chance you'll speak, could you please stand and take an oath? So if there's any chance you'll speak to the commission this evening. Raise your right hand. Do you swear to be truthful in the testimony you give? Tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth? If so, please say, I do. I do. Thank you. And I'll need a motion to go to executive session for election of officers.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move that we move to executive section for the election of officers for 2024.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Deeds, second by Mr. Wildenthaler. Roll call.
Mr. Woldenthaler.
Yes.
Mr. Donahue.
Yes.
Ms. Gooden.
Yes.
Ms. McDonald.
Yes.
Mr. Deeds, yes. Mr. Paulsgrove.
Yes.
Timeout 7:02 p.m. Good evening.
So thank you for entertaining some talking points, but I just grab that. You're ready to tee it up, or
When do you want to do?
I was just going to sort of follow the same process you had last time. I think some people might want to just introduce.
Do you want to do it after the variance, or during the conditional use, or the site plan? I guess what's the content of your presentation? I'm going to present all three.
The content of the presentation
Is it centered around the conditional uses?
Probably design, building design,
I mean, it's sort of centered on all three.
probably is conditional use, and it makes
So let's
sense.
do the presentation after the variance for the setbacks, unless you are talking about the setbacks at all in your presentation.
I mentioned the setbacks, but I think it's more material to conditional use.
Okay, so let's do it after the conditional use presentation.
Who's the secretary now? Is Brad?
Yeah. They'll probably do nose goes, who gets that?
What's that? Yeah, they're just electing officers.
What's that? Yeah.
Yes.
You ready to record it? It's recording.
Okay. Time in is 7:05 p.m. So at this time, I'll take election of officer nominations, please, and we'll start with the chair.
Mr. Chairman, I nominate Joe Donahue as chairman of Planning and Zoning for this year.
Second.
Motion made by Ms. Gooden for chair, for Joe Donahue, second by Mr. Wildenthaler. Roll call.
Mr. Wildenthaler?
Yes.
Mr. Donahue?
Yes.
Ms. Gooden?
Yes.
Ms. McDonald?
Yes.
Mr. Deeds? Yes. Mr. Pelsgrove?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries. Now I'll need a nomination for vice chairman for 2024.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to nominate Joe Wildenthaler as vice chair for the 2024 year.
I'll s-
Second.
Okay, motion made by Ms. McDonald, second by Ms. Gooden. Roll call, please.
Mr. Wildenthaler?
Yes.
Mr. Donahue?
Yes.
Ms. Gooden?
Yes.
Ms. McDonald?
Yes.
Mr. Deeds? Yes. Mr. Pelsgrove?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries. Now I'll need for secretary.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to nominate Rick Deeds as secretary for the 2024 year.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Paulsgrove, second by Mr. Wildenthaler. Roll call, please.
Mr. Wildenthaler?
Yes.
Mr. Donahue?
Yes.
Ms. Gooden?
Yes.
Ms. McDonald?
Yes.
Mr. Deeds? Yes. Mr. Pelsgrove?
Yes.
Okay.
You.
And I'll now turn it over to staff for our first application on the agenda.
The first application on tonight's agenda is variance 23-021. The address of the property is 123 Groveport Road. The request this evening is a variance from Chapter 1157.03, Section B, to permit a public use building to be located within 150 feet from a residentially zoned parcel. Quick recap, did a lot of the site history last month's meeting for those on the commission and the public that weren't here. The subject property consists of an 8.79 acre tract of land on the south side of Groveport Road, zoned R3 low density residential. Properties to the east are the Canal Villas condominiums, zoned planned residential district. Properties to the south are single family homes located in the Dye Addition, zoned low density residential. And properties to the east consists of several single-family homes along Groveport Road and vacant agricultural fields zoned low-density residential. And then properties to the north serve as a public parking lot for the Canal Winchester swimming pool. The applicant is requesting approval to construct a new public library on the subject property. The R3 zoning district for conditional uses states that for public uses, parks, playgrounds, recreation, and community center buildings and grounds, golf courses, public swimming pools, tennis courts, and similar recreational uses, provided that any principal building or use thereof shall be located not less than 150 feet from any other lot in any residential zoning district, unless otherwise approved as part of a development plan within a planned development district. The applicant is requesting a variance from the 150-foot setback for the east and west property boundaries. Up on the screen, the western property boundary they're showing for the building to that property line is 73.3 feet, and then to the east is 136.9 feet. The north and south setbacks for this conditional use section are being met. When looking at our zoning criteria for approval, the applicant has provided answers for the statement of need, sections A through G. As staff is evaluating those standards for special circumstances and conditions, the residential setbacks for the public uses are, in staff's opinion, intended for more intrusive sports-related uses that generate additional noise. That can be found just if you look at the criteria for the public uses and that setbacks. It goes through parks, playgrounds, recreational community centers, golf courses, public swimming pools, tennis courts, etc. So staff believes there is a special circumstance and conditions that exist that our zoning code did not contemplate when it was written. When looking at the literal interpretation for the zoning code, if it deprive rights of the applicant commonly enjoyed by other properties in the zoning district, the interpretation of the zoning code would require a property that is much bigger than what the applicant needs for the proposed use. Based off of their site plans, you can see that they have a pretty healthy 30,000 square foot building size, a pretty substantial parking lot to the rear, and still additional ground that is not needed, that was just part of the site that they acquired. And additionally, the burden of requiring setbacks to have 150 feet on the eastern and west property boundaries does make the site much less pedestrian-friendly and walkable, providing a greater distance to this public facility from surrounding land uses. For special conditions and circumstances that do not result from actions of the applicant, there are setback requirements, again, are intended for more recreational uses, as staff had analyzed with criteria number A. Granting the variance will not confer the applicant any undue privilege that is denied by the zoning code. Granting this variance would permit a site layout that is walkable and pedestrian-centered with the placement and scale of the building, and that granting the variance will not adversely affect the public health, safety, convenience, prosperity, and general welfare. Ordinarily, the required side yard setback for a commercial use in a commercially zoned property is 50 feet setback from a residentially zoned property. The fact that our conditional use standards for the public uses, and that specifically goes through recreational types of facilities, shows that this code section, should not apply when a commercially zoned property has a smaller setback at 50 feet from residential. Granting this variance is required before the applicant can receive any sort of approvals for conditional use. They filed with application CU 23-006 for the public library to operate on the subject property, and that granting this variance would permit a public library specifically to be located closer to the east and western property boundaries than the minimum 150 foot defined by the zoning code. So with that, staff is recommending that application VA 23-021 be approved as presented.
Questions for staff?
Yeah, Andrew, I just want to make sure I understood you, that if this were a residential zoning area butting up against a commercial zoning area, the setback would only be 50 feet?
Correct.
Thank you.
Is the alignment, yeah. Why the variation between the two side setbacks? Why are they not more evenly distributed?
The 173 to 136.
Yes.
So if you look at the travel around the site, on the western side of the facility is one-way traffic in, and the western side is one-way traffic out. One of the elements that staff tries to do with all projects is have access drives align where there could be cross access happening. With this one-way traffic, it wasn't always one-way in their plans, but regardless, this access drive does line up with one leading to the pool parking lot right across the street. So it was one of the items that staff had directed the applicant to try to get their access drives to match up.
And that access drive to the pool, I mean, that's a relatively unimproved road, right? So that could be moved if,
The access drive here,
yep, yes.
yeah, it's a private access drive into the city's lot, so we would have the ability to modify the access if we needed to.
You wouldn't want to move it further east towards the intersection West Street?
No,
No.
because
It causes conflicts to
Oh,
arise with turn
how
movements.
far is it from West Street?
Probably less than
Count parking spaces.
250 feet, I'd say, less than 200 feet.
Okay.
Any other questions for staff? Is the applicant present? Please, anything you wish to add? If you could just sign in and state your name.
Already signed in. My name is Rick Wertmeyer. I'm an architect with Bostwick Design Partnership. I don't have anything to add to the presentation unless there are questions I can answer from the commission or the staff. And there will be some further discussion for the next application that might illuminate discussion for the conditional use.
Yeah, right now, we're just talking about setback and the variance request. Okay, So since this is a variance, there is a public hearing. I would ask the public that if you do wish to speak, the time limit's 4 minutes. Please sign in, state your name. We'll start the timer at 4 minutes. At 3.5 minutes, I'll kindly interrupt saying you have 30 seconds left. Again, this would just be the time to speak on this particular application, which is a variance for a setback to be located within 150 feet of a residential parcel. So if anybody wishes to speak on that particular item, please come up and sign in and state your name.
I've signed in. My name's John Allen. Good evening. My name is John Allen, and I live at 129 Groveport Road, immediately west of the proposed library. I would ask that my time be extended to 8 minutes and 11 seconds, if that's okay. Actually, let's revisit that in about 3 minutes.
Continue.
The prospect of a new library in our community is exciting. I attended last month's commission meeting to gather what I could about the library's intended design, size, and footprint next door to me. Until then, I was aware that they had purchased the land, but that was all. Under different circumstances, I could and should have done better at staying fully informed from the very beginning of this process. Unfortunately, my time was largely being spent seeing to the medical needs of my wife as she transitioned to hospice care while finally losing a 14-year battle with cancer. Coming to the December meeting just 3 weeks after her burial was a bit overwhelming, but I'm glad that I did. It provided me information I needed to gather my thoughts on a truncated timetable and present them here tonight. If I spoke for long about the appearance of the building, it would be in solidarity with many who have already expressed their thoughts about the design and the materials used and the way it seems to disregard the surrounding infrastructure of the very community it hopes to serve. I'll let others continue to elaborate those points in the hopes that the message will start to get through. When you are granted the privilege of spending millions of taxpayer dollars, it comes with a reasonable expectation that you intend to listen to those taxpayers. Where my viewpoint is more unique is in regards to the setbacks for the property. The building presented in December would rest only 73.3 feet from me, and the main entry drive less than 30 feet away. The library was informed roughly 2 years ago that the zoning standard for the project is 150 feet. To even propose a build that falls less than half that distance away is the result of choices made in planning that fall somewhere between simple oversight and intentional disregard. On that subject, opinions in this room probably vary, and I expect the votes to be cast later might reflect that. If the voting tonight is mixed, it is because deciding what is accepted or tolerable is inherently subjective to the individual. My earlier request of 8 minutes and 11 seconds to speak, while in jest, was simply me, in principle, applying the same math ratio as the variance requested by asking for a concession that allows me over double the agreed upon standard for everyone else. Returning to the actual unit of measurement at hand, the 150-foot setback from the library as proposed actually lands on the property of Brian and Judy, my neighbors to the west. Put another way, voting to allow the variance is a failure to acknowledge that my property even exists. While there may be a variance that is tolerable, this is not it. This is egregious. You can decide for yourself, but you aren't deciding for me. I've decided I'm not okay with it. To anyone who votes to approve the variance tonight, I would request the courtesy of talking to me afterwards and telling me why you are okay with it. We bought our home because we liked that the closest structures on 3 of 4 sides were anywhere from 200 to 600 feet away, and our garage blocks the line of sight to the only house closer than that. It feels about as private as a third of an acre can to still be walking distance from historic downtown Canal. This library could be built just as designed with no changes except to move it south on the property where they have multiple acres going unused and setback to spare. They could flip the build plan and place the parking lot by the road and the building behind. Both options eliminate the need to even apply for this setback variance. Wouldn't it be better to first pursue options that don't require any zoning alterations rather than set a precedent that makes many other Canal Winchester residents concerned about how zoning will or won't represent their interests in the future? Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you. Anybody else that wishes?
Jackie Marion, 262 Westwood Drive. I think most of you know my opinion of this library. I sent you an email. My concerns were it's totally out of place in the location where we're proposing it. It infringes radically on John Allen's home, and I think it sets a precedent that's kind of dangerous for Canal Winchester. Your committee, like Landmarks, has a great responsibility to what this city is going to look like in the future. In the past few years, there have been many people in our community that have worked hard to keep it charming. And it is charming. Residents think it's charming. Visitors to the downtown think it's charming. But you have to work at that. It doesn't come easy. You have a choice tonight to be either part of that plan that goes forward to keep it charming or start the erosion to make it like other big cities that are not charming. I'd like to quote from the recent community plan. The top 3 objectives as far as community character and urban designer are balanced land uses within the community that respects existing neighborhoods. And I don't think this proposal does that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kay Sargent, 6732 Braeswick Court. John Allen was quite eloquent. I won't be such. I am very concerned about the west setback. It is just too big. Maybe it is 50 feet for a commercial site. This is not a commercial site. Also, there's a roadway there. And in the information that the Columbus Library sent out in terms of the new Gahanna Library, there's 400,000 people who frequent that or have since March. If you do the math on that, that would, and apply it in terms of the hours of operation and the amount of cars, assuming it's 2 or 3 people per car, that would mean 76 cars per hour. We are not talking about 75 feet where nothing is happening. We're talking about 75 feet where there's a roadway and 76 cars traveling during working hours. I recommend to planning and zoning to not accept that setback. The other setbacks, that's fine. But over 75 feet off, that is not acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public wish to speak on this particular variance request? I'll ask one more time. Regarding this variance request and the setbacks, is there anybody else from the public that wishes to take this time to speak? Yeah, just wait 1 second, sir. All right, we need a motion to close the public hearing.
Mr. Chairman, I move we close public hearing.
Second. Roll call.
Mr. Wollenthaler?
Yes.
Mr. Donahue?
Yes.
Ms. Gooden?
Yes.
Ms. McDonald?
Yes.
Mr. Deeds? Yes. Mr. Pelsgrove?
Yes. Sir, please. Okay. So, I do have an additional question for staff. Has the applicant had, and I know we're going to talk about the site development plan and conditional use, but I think it's important for some of us to know on the board, have there been any conversations around landscape on the west elevation that's not shown in the plan with the applicant?
So after the last month's planning and zoning kind of presentation of this project to kind of run through what the proposal was, the library wanted to do that with the commission here. They left with feedback from the board, residents, and staff on what, could be done for the project. One of the things staff did suggest was to look at landscaping on the, specifically the western property boundary, just based on concerns for that setback. Noting that our commercial development standards require landscaping in addition to a 50-foot setback. While, again, this is not commercially zoned and doesn't have the same 50-foot standard, that it seemed like something that was a good idea in staff's perspective, regardless of it being required. But in terms of what's required by code, there are no landscaping standards there. They are showing several trees. You can see in the landscape plan if you flip ahead. But in terms of like fencing or mounding or dense shrubbery, there is nothing to shield the building, just the parking lot to the rear.
And again, the way it's zoned, there's no requirements, but there's been no further discussion with the applicant in
Correct.
regards to that, especially the west elevation.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any other questions or discussion before we have a motion?
Actually, clarification, is the variance to be less than the 150-foot, or is the variance to give that, is for the 73-foot and the 136-foot?
So if you look at the application that the applicant has submitted, they specify that they would like to have a reduction to a minimum of 70 feet to the west and 135 feet to the east. Their plans here show 73.3 and 136, but they would like the buffer there at 70 and 135, just in case things need to be shifted throughout the final engineering phase, they don't have to come back. So they're not asking for a blanket request, it's specific within that window.
So if they were to change the footprint of the property on the parcel, a new variance request, if applicable, would be warranted.
Yes, if they wanted it to be closer than 70 feet to the west or 135 to the east.
I guess I'm still interested in trying to provide a little bit of extra space on the west side. If we decrease the size of the lanes, right, make them single lanes instead, because they're pretty much double-sized lanes, right? That does shift the building potentially a little bit, not a lot. I do understand the trying to align that across, but it just feels like it is such a, I mean, is the pool going to always be there? Probably not. So what's that parking lot going to be used for? Who knows? And like I said, the road doesn't have curbs and gutters, so there's a lot of probable transition over the future. So to me, wiggling it a few feet to give a little bit of relief, center a little bit more, I think kind of is a bit of a compromise that moves the needle a little bit, in my opinion.
And that's something that staff would recommend discussion with the applicant about, if you want to discuss different alternatives. It could always be something that they can revise plans based off of feedback as well.
Yeah, please.
I just want to make a comment specific to the landscaping along the west. In talking with the library, this hasn't been reflected in the application, which technically is now from November, but given the feedback we've gotten, we wanted to just inform you before you make a final vote that we would be very interested and willing to talk about increasing landscape and fencing along the west property line as part of this discussion.
And do you, and I know we'll get to this, but is there a reason those weren't submitted, or is those all discussion points at this point? You know, why weren't those submitted to staff prior to this meeting in terms of renderings? I'm asking because I'm purely curious.
Well, we hadn't actually determined that we hadn't created a site plan that showed those for approval by the library, other than just discussing it in principle.
Okay.
And with the holidays, we didn't have a lot of back and forth time to make a new application for the record in enough time for this meeting. But I just want to assure you and the residents who have expressed concerns on the west property line. Add additional landscaping or fencing.
Is there any appetite from the library to potentially shuffle the footprint of the building? I'm not saying you got to move it 150 feet away, but is there any? Okay.
Yeah, we're just confirming we're in alignment. And one of the points I was going to make in a further presentation was the building has moved a bit sort of west and east over the course of the design advancement. And as Andrew pointed out, ultimately, there were two driving reasons that moved the building to its current location. One being the drive to align with the pool access across the street. And corresponding to that was a more generous landscaped access path from the east, as you can see, and you'll see some images of that in the next presentation. But it's a long answer to say yes, we are amenable to moving the project, moving the footprint of the building farther east if that is preferred and amenable to the commission.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any additional comments or questions?
I think what he's talking about is if you move it,
Yes.
this whole thing, yeah.
I'm going to say no, but I'm not exactly sure how we represent that with a vote.
So we've got, we've got a site development plan.
Correct.
And we've got a conditional use before that. So the appropriateness of the project on the parcel. So right now, we're strictly talking about a setback variance that
Right.
I think either way, any way you slice it, there's going to be a variance of some sort. Maybe it's 73.3 feet, maybe it's 70 feet, maybe it's 85 feet, I don't know. But I think at the end of the day, the way it's zoned and the way the parcel's designed, and there's a 30,000 square foot building there, that there will be some sort of variance request, I think, in my opinion.
A future one?
No,
Yeah,
even if the
totally
building
agree.
shifts.
Yeah, that's why I asked if it was a variance of the 150, because that implies wiggle room, right?
Yeah.
At 73 and 136, we're kind of locked in.
So staff, can you reconfirm?
So, based on what you guys are discussing, you would either make a motion to approve the variance with a specific minimum distance, and then the library can figure that out, or another alternative would be that they can come back at a future meeting and show how they want to shift it and change those numbers. I guess arbitrarily picking a number would table their site development plan at the end, because it doesn't show what the setbacks are, and it could change access drives, access points, locations. So it's hard to say. I guess you're changing the whole site plan by suggesting moving things.
Yeah, I get it. So again, the request before us is a variance to permit a public use building to be located within 150 feet from a residential zoned parcel. Are there any other further questions for staff, comments, or do we have a motion? And now's the time for any further discussion or questions if we have them.
I think for me, if there's some condition in there of adjusting that setback, yeah, it is kind of hard to pick an arbitrary number.
If we kind of split the difference, we're basically talking about 100 feet each side.
Right.
But that's, if I understood Andrew's point, if we pick that number as 100 feet setback each side, then the site development plan pretty much gets tabled until they can come back to us and show us how that fits.
Correct.
Why can't that just, that almost sounds like a condition of the site development plan then as well.
It would change the access points, so it would substantially change the site plan. It would change drainage.
Of course.
Yeah,
And it would require them to change the landscape plans to accommodate for the new site
Some-
plan.
yes,
So
there would be
there's
some
just
of
a
that.
lot to change if you were to require that significant of a shift in the plan.
The applicant did state that in additional applications, if this variance is approved, that they would be open to discussing landscaping and proper shielding and fencing, and those could also be conditions of the site development plan. So I'm just ensuring the commission knows that that was a comment that the applicant made this evening.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt or allow variance VA 23-021.
I'll second.
So any further discussion? Just another quick point of clarification, Mr. Moore, can you go back to the, yeah. And so, again, the distance and the north elevation is roughly 30 feet from the right-of-way, is that right?
To the north is 30.5.
And then to the rear, is that 640 some feet?
So let me skip ahead to that staff report. It is,
In your materials, it's 647.8.
there you go.
And so, again, from last month's meeting, the current site development plan that's before us this evening, all of that is to be retained green space that the library may use for future parking or development or growth or expansion down the road, but they do intend to keep that natural and, to Mr. Hare's point, the drainage and lots of things would change if we put in a requirement to make it some sort of specific number for the variance, so. Okay, any further discussion? So we had a motion made by Ms. Gooden, second by Ms. McDonald. Roll call, please.
Mr. Willenthaler,
Yes.
Mr. Donahue,
Yes.
Ms. Gooden,
Yes.
Ms. McDonald,
Yes.
Mr. Deeds. Yes, Mr. Paulsgrove.
Yes.
Okay, so the variance for the setback is approved.
The next application on tonight's agenda is conditional use 23006. Again, same address, 123 Groveport Road. This is a conditional use request to permit a public library on the 8.79 acre tract of land. When looking at the subject property, it is zoned R3 low density residential. The R3 low density residential is a zoning district that is for residential districts and other supporting uses that are compatible with residential uses, such as churches, public facilities, and schools. When looking at conditional uses here, one of the conditional uses that is permitted is for public uses. And a conditional use, just again for background, is identified as being a use that could more intensely affect surrounding areas which they are located. So the details of that use can be compatible with the zoning district, but necessitates the review by the Planning and Zoning Commission. The applicant is requesting for a new 30,000 square foot public library on the subject parcel. The plans note that this library will be open 7 days a week with varying hours from 9 a.m. to close, no later than 8 p.m. The expected number of staff working at the facility is between 24 to 30 full-time employees. When looking at the criteria for approval for the conditional use, sections A through E, the first is that the proposed use for a public library is a conditional use for the zoning district. This is true that a public use would be the public library for the subject parcel. The proposed use is compatible with adjacent land uses, zoning, and appropriate plans for the area. The proposed public library is compatible with adjacent land use and zoning plans for the area. The facility is located across the street from the public swimming pool, which is another public use. It is located within walking distance of residential homes, Geiler Park, Hanners Park, other public uses within the corridor. The library is currently renting space within the local school district administrative office building. They're looking to expand and open their own dedicated facility that will offer more services to the community. The proposed use will not adversely impact access, traffic flow, or other public facilities and uses. The plans call for one-way access drives at 24 feet wide circulating the building with parking located to the rear. These access drives, for frame of reference, are similar to the width of Groveport Road at 23 feet. The proposed use will not result in the destruction, loss, or damage of natural, scenic, or historic features. And the proposed use for a public library will enhance the public health, safety, convenience, comfort, prosperity, and general welfare for the community. When looking at their proposal here again, briefly touched on it here, but they talked about the hours of operation, number of employees, and that their plans call for a single-story building with parking located to the rear, building pushed to the front. And then Planning and Zoning Commission just approved the variance for the building that had a minimum 70-foot setback to the west and 135-foot setback to the east, meeting the conditions of approval for the conditional use. So staff is recommending the variance for conditional use be approved as presented.
So questions, comments for staff? And again, this is for the conditional use that would cover the appropriateness of this project on the parcel and encompass various things as it relates to the site development plan. Is there going to be an additional presentation for the site development plan?
Yeah, the applicant has a presentation they would like to make for this. If the chairman, if you want them to make the presentation before your discussion or after, that is totally your call.
Yeah. If the applicant is willing to give their presentation at this time during this part of the meeting, that would be preferred.
So thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner, and members of the Commission for allowing us the chance to share this presentation with you. Most of what we're going to talk about is a proud legacy of development that you and the residents are intimately familiar with. Mostly we wanted to show you the perspective of the corridor on Groveport Road on which this library sits, and just sort of allow the perspective through our lens as we're thinking about how this building is developed. And I want to remind everyone that our job is to realize the vision of the Columbus Metropolitan Library, and this building has a job to do. It is a public library, and the library is emphatically committed to putting the library services that are funded by the public on display, and do that in a very contemporary and forward-looking way. So this building is consistent with the vision of the library. But I do want to talk about the physical context and some of the development precedents, which again you are all familiar with. As a reminder, Groveport Road is the Canal route, the bike path across the street, and the properties that align with Groveport Road are the historic Canal route. So we felt it was instructive, certainly to our design process, but also for reference for this commission to look at the other developments, historic and recent, along this important route. So first, and this is referenced also in your community plan, the Brewdog, which is an exciting development that is somewhat recent compared to some of the other ones we'll talk about, along the west end of this corridor. And then as we move farther to the east, the Canal Winchester Lodge 670, a more functional, straightforward, but again, proud addition to Groveport Road. And immediately adjacent to that is the Ultra-Care Canal Winchester, which has a base of brick and then an alternate material above. More recently is New Faith Church, which has a band of sort of grayish stone at the base and siding above. And immediately adjacent to that is the residential development, the Ponds at Madison. Again, sort of a grayish stone at the base and kind of gray with white trim. Across the street at that point is the skate park. Again, less of an architectural reference, but more part of the development landscape on Groveport Road that this project sits in. Immediately east of that is Heritage Baptist Church, which is a combination of some historic brick, but also white siding. And then the David Evangelical Lutheran Church, again, set pretty far back off of Groveport Road because of the properties that used to be the canal sit between the actual right-of-way and the properties. Another new building is Human Services with a base of brick and another alternate siding material above. And then Canal Village David's Way, moving farther east. And then this is the view towards Old Town from our site. Just as a reference point, its connection to Old Town is sort of around the bend and past some of the other public amenities, most notably the pool, which you'll see in a second. Immediately to our east are the Canal Villas, again a sort of a lighter stone with some gray tones and then a tan siding. And then the pool structures and the pool property, which are concrete masonry units. They're sort of gray and kind of a pinkish red color. And then farther down as we get closer to the Old Town residential, there's some new development with white trim, and then some of the older houses as we get towards the intersection of Washington. And then this property, which I think until relatively recently was a red brick building painted white for the purposes of a new business. And then at the terminus of what the extension of Groveport, which is Towpath Way, is the Canal Winchester Intra-Urban Depot in tan brick and red tile, and then Waterloo 1 and 2 white. I didn't highlight the single-family homes, which I think everyone is familiar. I think I counted 26 homes, which are varying materials, often with white trim. Some are brick, but it's a remarkable legacy of development up and down Groveport Road, one that presents a varied context in which to design. So we'll get to some new renderings in a moment, but I also wanted to point out the design ordinance 119903, which outlines the elements of the building design, and I wanted to highlight how this building accommodates the aspects of that ordinance. So first is that the building is designed so that all four sides, 360 degrees, are developed as similar materials and similar quality. That's true. And then the architectural features, there are requirements that don't define styles, but they define sort of a sense of scale and a sense of breaking up the elevation from being sort of more of a monotonous front. So these diagrams show this building sort of accurately reflects the functions inside. So there's some large spaces that highlight meeting rooms and the main reading room and quiet room and children's areas. And then there have been sort of layered into that some secondary elements that highlight aspects of the facade while I would argue that they are sort of more contemporary, consistent with the library's guiding principles, they are still consistent with the request of the building design guidelines. And then as we move around to the shorter sides of the building, again, how the design as presented complies. The renderings that I used for this section of the presentation were as presented in November, and I do want to take a moment in a few moments to talk about some updated renderings. The last pieces of the building design guideline talk about articulation. There is a request for materials to be 80% natural. I would say that Pat Lazinski from the library sort of eloquently spoke about the importance of transparency. We'll talk about that in a minute in the new renderings as well. So that is something that technically is inconsistent on the current building unless we consider glass a natural material. And then building orientation. I think, again, the building is designed so that the public services are transparently placed as close to the public right-of-way as possible. So that, again, that investment in giving back to the community is very visible. Given the transparency, the front entrance will be visible from Groveport Road, although it will not be facing Groveport Road. So with that, I want to transition to some building updates. And two things. One is the renderings that were presented originally were primarily to finalize exterior materials in conversation with the library. And they didn't accurately reflect landscaping, which we know is a critical aspect of the design. So these renderings show some sort of brightened materials and also some improvements to the landscaping rendering. A quick stop on the site plan. We talked about it earlier. The site has moved a bit back and forth, and I think we will highlight as of this evening's meeting additional landscaping and fencing on the west elevation. A few other things that I also wanted to highlight just for consideration. One of the things that the library was committed to at the outset was a full-service drive-up window. That was inconsistent with the zoning ordinance, and the library, in conversation with the staff, deleted that portion of the building. There is still a drive-up book drop, which is just sort of a quick stop and drive forward, but the full-service window has been removed. And another thing that Andrew actually touched on was that originally there was an in-and-out sort of entrance drive to the west, and then a one-way system on the east, and that was to sort of facilitate the one-way system so you can get the car kind of up against the building for the drop-off. Again, talking with Andrew and staff, the library agreed to make this a one-way loop, so instead of having two ways, a one-way in and out on the west side, they agreed to change that to a one-way system in. One thing that I think is beneficial to all in this context is the library had originally included more parking spaces based on a sort of a rule of thumb for a branch in this kind of community. Lucas and Andrew recommended that with the parking access across the street, might we reduce that and again sort of reduce the development farther south, so the library has reduced the number of original parking spaces. The other thing that we've improved is on the east side of the site. We originally just had some straight sidewalks, sort of straightforward way to get to the entrance. And with the encouragement of the staff, we have really enhanced a very walkable sort of curving landscape path to get to the main library entrance on the south side of the building. And as associated with that, the electrical transformer had originally been placed more or less right on that path. But given that sort of, I think the library felt that that wasn't necessarily the best amenity to have right along that landscape path, that the library agreed to move that south so that that enclosure is farther away from the building. But again, another amenity that was relative to comments from staff. So a couple of new renderings that we shared late last week. And again, we appreciate the patience as we were developing these over the holidays, and I appreciate Andrew letting us include them here. So this is a view looking west on Groveport Road. So Groveport Road in this view is to the right. A proposed, currently non-existent sidewalk is shown along Groveport Road. And this would be the entrance to that sort of curving landscaped path that would take you to the front door farther south on the building. So this also shows the intent to have brick and capped landscape walls, so that would both frame that sort of walkway towards the back as well as provide places to sit along the way. This is a view from the west, sort of if you're standing at the edge of the drive looking at the sort of corner where the meeting rooms are. Again, starting to show a little more transparency, also showing a more robust landscape plan with trees facing Groveport Road. The back area that has a little more brick is more for privacy for the staff area, but consistent with the design of some of the other buildings that we saw along Groveport Road, there's a base of brick along the many portions of the Groveport Road side. The difference is instead of siding with sort of small windows, the material that connects that sort of brick base to the roof line, in this case, is glass to maximize transparency. So as we move around to the west side of the building, so again, Groveport now is on your left. There is another sidewalk along that side of the building. and along the walkway, you can see additional landscaping, some accent boulders, and then we're looking at the children's area of the building on the right-hand side, and then a quiet reading room sort of in the more enclosed space there. As we move around to the south, this is the view from the parking lot. So this is similar to the views you saw. One of the things that this highlights, maybe more specifically, and I'll bring out some materials in a moment, is in the discussions after the early December meetings, we talked about lightening the trim, again, looking at some of the residential examples up and down the street where there's this sort of white or light colored trim that frames the wood siding. So this is one of the changes that these renderings reflect, in addition to some lighting that is proposed, accent lighting on the building. And then this is a view sort of straight on from the parking lot along a landscape path to the front entrance from the south. These are some similar views, essentially just showing a little more of the transparency as we shift into evening time. And as we think about how the building will essentially showcase those services. So in many ways, the elevation of the building is the interior of the building. This also highlights some accent lighting that is currently intended along the perimeter of the wood, sort of aluminum but wood look framing around the walls and roof line. And then at night, that light will be sort of a guiding path from the parking lot to the main entrance, from near and from a little bit farther away. And the final view here is just of the main reading room, the sort of primary view along Groveport Road, showing clearly the kind of grand space within the library, how the sort of lighting will enhance the visibility of the interior and put the services to the community on display, and also showing the landscaping in front. I'll leave you with just a quick sort of facts and figures, and I think a lot of this has already been covered in discussion prior, so I won't belabor this other than to just sort of point out that the site, as a reminder, is outside of the historic district, which includes both the historic district and the preservation district, so it's outside of Old Town. And Andrew sort of corrected this point, which I appreciate. The library would either require rezoning or conditional use, regardless of where it was placed inside the city limits. So there is one district that does include libraries as a permitted use. That's the SO district. That district is included in the zoning ordinance. It's not currently included in the zoning map. One of the options that was considered for this site was to potentially change it to an SO district so that the library would not require a conditional use. However, that comes with other sort of ramifications, including only a 50-foot setback would be required. The residents surrounding would then sort of be contending with a sort of suburban office district around their property. So it seemed more efficient and expedient and appropriate to sort of take the path of conditional use versus rezoning. I also think it was a shorter process, if I recall the conversation. The other thing is within the conditional uses, I think given the conversation around setbacks, we don't need to sort of compare and contrast other functions and conditional use in the zoning district. So I will leave this presentation sort of at that point and appreciate your attention and time.
So in summary, the updated renderings showed us the full service window removed, one-way traffic pattern around the building, the brick landscaped walls that I don't believe were part of it, and then is the lighter colored trim the only color change that's being proposed at this point?
Currently, the lighter color trim is the only color change. I will say that we did, after the public input, explore the possibility of red brick. I will say again, the timing, but also consistency with the kind of legacy of contemporary design brand that the library has created over the last 10 years. It started to cascade a whole series of other changes that seemed to kind of overwhelm the possibility. And sort of my own personal view is to sort of take a material that's sort of near and dear to this community's heart and kind of use it as an applique on a building that is decidedly contemporary, felt a little bit disingenuous, given the rest of the development and the rest of the sort of design aesthetic that this contemporary library is designed to achieve. But I will bring out the rest of the materials.
Thank you. And staff, the lighting, which I guess per the zoning and the way this is currently zoned, would not need any sort of approval since the way it's currently zoned. There would be no issues with the lighting that they're, the accent lighting, if you will, that they're proposing as a change from last month's development plan.
Yeah, the low-density residential district does not contemplate regulating lighting on these types of uses.
Okay. Okay, so let's see, any other questions? What additional questions for staff or the applicant, since we're kind of doing this together? Any other questions? Okay. We had a public hearing last month for this application, and I have decided to continue that public hearing for the conditional use, so I will reopen the public hearing. So again, if you wish to speak on the conditional use, so again, the design, the appropriateness of the building, the appropriateness of the project on this parcel, those are all things that are on the table to talk about. You have 4 minutes. We won't start the timer until you sign in and begin to speak. I'll kindly remind you with 30 seconds left that you have 30 seconds remaining. It's also on the screen. So if you could, just please come up, sign in, state your name, and you may speak if you wish to speak on the conditional use.
What are we signing?
There should be a paper.
My name is Angela Barnes, and I live at 6780 Lehman Road in Columbus, Ohio. I just had a couple questions regarding his presentation. Maybe he can answer those. He said that there would be parking across the street and that the parking was going to be reduced for the building, and that they would have the access to park across the street. And I wanted to know, would there be crosswalks for being able to walk across the street and to allow children who might be coming back and forth across that street to have a crosswalk, and who was going to be providing that? I also wanted to know how many spaces is it being reduced by, and I wanted to know if there are conference rooms and what size the conference rooms are that would be available at the library. That's all.
Thank you. I think, Ms. Barnes, I do believe some of those questions will get answered in the next application.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
I'm trying to make sure I got the questions. Andrew may be able to speak more to the parking across the street. That's not a lot, but it was seen as an asset to the site, which helped determine the number of spaces. I believe the original count was 150.
Joe,
We've reduced it down.
can we leave the public comments and then address everything?
You want to address them in discussion?
In discussion and
Sure.
the final, just so there's no back and forth,
Yeah.
and it makes it a little more
Should I just
streamlined.
wait?
Yeah, just hold tight. Any other public comment on the conditional use? Going once, going twice.
Mr. Chairman, I move we close public hearing.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Willenthaler, second by Mr. Paulsgrove. Roll call?
Mr. Willenthaler?
Yes.
Mr. Donahue?
Yes.
Ms. Gooden?
Yes.
Ms. McDonald?
Yes.
Mr. Deeds? Yes. Mr. Paulsgrove?
Yes.
Okay, now we can address the questions.
So to answer some of the questions, the proposed building only requires 60 parking stalls, so they exceed what the minimums are, so they have no issues from the city's end on that front. Our discussion with the applicant to reduce the number of parking spaces behind the building was during peak times is what facilities typically try to plan parking for. With this being in a residential district, the reduction of parking would seemingly be favorable to surrounding residents. Less parking, keep setbacks further away from homes and property lines. There is the public lot across the street for the swimming pool that does have parking available, whenever there's not swim meets and big, events. It's fairly underutilized outside of those peak times. The city would like to increase access to the site by extending the sidewalk to get to the intersection of West Street, which would provide a pedestrian crossing movement to that lot. So those are all, things that were taken into consideration with the site plan with the applicant.
And would there be ability to stripe the street for a crosswalk if we
I don't
find
Yeah,
it?
the intent is we would have a crosswalk at West Street.
But
So
before the
you'd have-
sidewalk? would
You'd
there-
have accessible ramps from each one, and then we'd have a sidewalk that extended west from the West Street or the condo entrance
Okay. All
to the
way.
library site.
Okay.
And so that would be done as part of our street program. I don't know if it'll be this year or next year as part of that program.
But in the short term, if it wasn't, Mr. Hare, would there be an opportunity to put a crosswalk from the parking lot to the library if we found that there was, a lot of foot traffic there?
I mean, it's, at an intersection, it's a legal crossing. You wouldn't want to put a mid-block crossing in. We've had challenges with that. We have a challenge with the intersection at Thrush that comes up there. We've put a flashing beacon in for the crosswalk that crosses there. But this is a 25-mile-an-hour section of that roadway rather than a 35-mile-per-hour.
Yeah.
And so the intent would be to have those accessible ramps and then have a crosswalk and a sidewalk that goes up to the site.
Any additional comments, questions, staff or the applicant?
I don't think people are going to walk down 200 feet to come across the street to come back up 200 feet, so.
I would agree.
We may have to figure out what to do with that.
A lot of jaywalking,
Yeah.
I would think.
I mean, that does happen other places in town, yes.
Yes.
I think you wanted to comment on the conference rooms?
Yeah, I did. And Andrew, I don't know if you have the full application, or if this is just a summary of that, but I can quote and then I can show you. So the building plan has 3 large meeting rooms. 2 of them will seat, say, 16 to 20 in sort of conference style. The other one is more for, say, 26 to 32, or maybe even a larger number if it's just sort of seating like this. There are also 9 study rooms, which are small group, typically 2 people. 3 of them are actually big enough for 4 people. So those are sort of the number of spaces specifically dedicated to meetings. There's also a quiet reading room, which really isn't a meeting room, but it's an enclosed space that you can get away from the open area. And then there's a multi-purpose room, which sort of consistent with its name, sometimes will serve kids, sometimes will serve adults, and it's located in a place that you can get to it from kind of either side. So I can show her the plan.
Thank you. All right. If there's no further discussion, I'll take a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve conditional use CU-23-006.
Second.
So a motion was made by Mr. Deeds, second by Ms. Gooden. Any further discussion on the motion? Mr. Deeds, roll call, please.
Mr. Wildenthaler?
Yes.
Mr. Donahue?
Yes.
Ms. Gooden?
Yes.
Ms. McDonald?
Yes.
Mr. Deeds, yes. Mr. Paulsgrove?
Yes.
Okay, so conditional use is approved with no conditions.
The last application on tonight's agenda is Site Development Plan 23-009. The request this evening is to approve a new 30,000 square foot public library on the subject parcel. Again, the applicant is requesting approval to construct a new public library. The proposed 30,000 square foot building is single story at 33 feet tall at the tallest portion. The plans note the facility will be open 7 days a week with varying hours, no later than 8 p.m., and that the number of full-time staff is between 24 and 30 full-time employees. For the site, it has the following setbacks: minimum of 30 feet from the front yard, 30 feet from the rear yard, and 150 feet from the side yards. Variance approval, CA 23-021, approved a reduction to minimum 73 from the west and 135 feet to the east. The parking and access, the site has 2 oversized one-way access drives on Groveport Road. The eastern access drive at 24 feet wide aligns with the public pool parking lot on the north side of the road. This access drive is an exit drive. The library's access drive to the west is a 24-foot wide access drive, and that is an in-access drive to the site. The access drives are spaced 213.4 feet apart, meeting the minimum 150-foot spacing for a 25-mile-per-hour roadway. The plans note that there are 130 parking stalls. Minimum of 60 are required for our zoning code. The plans note 4 future electric vehicle parking stalls are planned within this count. In addition, on the east side of the building, there's a book drop-off area with a pull-off zone as you exit the facility. When looking at the, actually going back here, the building entrance, as was highlighted in the previous discussions, on the rear elevation of the building facing the parking lot. The plans show a sidewalk to be constructed along Groveport Road with a pedestrian walkway on the eastern side of the site that will connect the public walkway to the rear. The plans do call out 15 bike racks on the south side of the building. For utilities for this facility, sanitary sewer is available through an existing public line on the south side of Groveport Road. Water is available through a new public water line on the north side of Groveport Road. And the plans show a private stormwater bioretention system within the rear parking lot area that will tie into the regional storm line that is currently piped underground. The applicant has provided a landscape plan and tree removal plan for review. With the trees being removed, the little red circles here on the screen being tabulated with our landscape replacement schedule, they are required to plant 91 trees on the subject parcel. Those 91 trees can be planted literal at the 2.5-inch minimum size, or if they plant bigger trees, then multiple smaller trees count for some larger trees, vice versa. So they are looking at some of those kind of tabulations with the landscaping plan here to show a total of 120 trees to be planted. The requirements in the landscape code require 144 trees to be planted on site. So they are looking to plant 120 at 144, and the remainder will pay into this tree fund for the city of Canal, Winchester, so we can plant elsewhere within the city. When looking at the bioretention system the applicant has provided, you can see here these dark green patches within the parking lot will be planted with plant material. They will have reliefs in the curbs to allow for stormwater to exit the parking lot to enter the bioretention basin. And then it'll lead to a dry basin that is kind of wrapping the southwest corner of the parking lot here. The plans here note that it's designed to be mowable with additional plantings at the bottom of the plan. The details for this bioretention basin will be looked at during our civil engineer review. So kind of just imagine here, they're proposing a dry basin in this bottom corner with some plantings in it, but this exact shape and depth will likely to change during civil review. The applicant has provided a lighting plan. The plan shows 13 light poles at the entry drives at 18 feet tall. There are 6 dual head light poles in the rear parking lot area at 25 feet tall, and 4 light poles within the pedestrian path at 12 feet tall. All the light fixtures are the modern LED cutoff fixture shown on the screen. The photometric plans show there is zero spillover at all the property lines. This is something that our commercial development standards require for the zero spillover. It's not required for residential zone projects, but one of the things staff had the applicant look at was to make sure there was no spillover to help it integrate with the residential development that surrounds it. The applicant has provided interior floor plan, touched briefly about the multipurpose meeting space, some of the different zones within the building. But again, this kind of illustration here is just to show that the main entry to the buildings to the rear, and then they have emergency egress kind of points around the building, and then a breakdown from back of house stuff here in the southeast corner versus what the public can engage in a majority of the space. The building design, the applicant has provided exterior elevations. The design is a modern architectural style that shows clear glazing, a dark gray-black brick and metal panels with a wood tone printed pattern on them. A tiered flat roof with angular wall sections and projecting metal louvers break up the facade. Again, the applicant noted this building is atypical for the area, and that it is modern to follow the library's kind of design practices for their future growth. Again, looking at the west, east, and south elevations of the building that the applicant kind of covered in their presentation earlier this evening. Again, one of the things that these renderings do not showcase, the applicant provided in their update, is the kind of halo lighting around all the glass storefront systems. Those aren't called out in here. Again, the kind of lighting that funnels you into the main entry, that's not shown on this illustration that was provided in your packet. And I guess also backing up with the landscape plan, not showing kind of that brick seating wall. Some of those elements are a little different, depending how literal you want to take the kind of planting bioretention plan on that rendering as well. Staff had asked the applicant to provide some more information on that kind of wood metal panel system. Again, just a newer product. Wanted the commission to be familiar with it. They've provided samples, physical samples for your review, as well as a kind of a detailed sample of how that material is layered and locks into place. This is one of the branches they've already constructed with that same material, just a slightly different finish, but to show you kind of what it looks like from a street view perspective. In terms of the dumpster enclosure and electric transformer enclosure, the applicant has provided a kind of atypical 2x4 alternating patterned enclosure. The details for that are provided on the screen, but primarily it's showing you that it's 8 foot tall to screen the enclosures. It is shown at 24 feet in width and a little over 12 feet in depth. Again, some of the renderings that were provided with this presentation from last month, showing from Groveport Road perspective, and then showing from the rear of the parking lot area. So staff is recommending the site development plan be approved as presented, given that the variance application VA 23021 and conditional use application CU 23006 was approved this evening.
Questions for staff? So, Mr. Moore, how detailed do we need to be in our motion? So, there are some changes that the applicant laid out in the previous application, just as it relates to traffic pattern. I don't believe the dimensions or anything are changing. The brick capped walls from a landscaping perspective, and then of course we'll talk about landscaping on that west elevation, and then the color and trim I would assume is a moot point, just given the zoning and there's no specific requirements for that based on the R3 zoning district. Is that correct?
So depending on how your motion is structured, if you motion to approve as presented, it is what I presented and what they submitted for their public review. If you want any above and beyond extras that were within their presentation to you this evening, that would be something you would want to include as conditions of approval if you want to see them. Things like the seating wall, they don't have to build unless you say you want that. They could omit that during like a civil review stage, because right now it's purely conceptual. It's not on any plans for anybody to look at. Same with, adding any conditions for landscaping. If you have conditions you'd like to see for that, and you want staff to take control of, how that looks, then we can do that at a later stage. If you want all these details to come back for your personal review, then you can request, that as well.
Thank you.
And same with color. The color of the building is as presented in their formal packet, not any changes they brought tonight unless you specifically permit.
But if we approve the packet as presented to us here, there's nothing to stop them from changing the color, is there?
I would say if you approve the building as presented in the packet, then they can't change the color without asking for new approval. It'd be similar to like when Walmart wants to paint their exterior facade. It's a change that has to come back to the commission.
So if I understood the presentation tonight, they're talking about changing the trim color to white. That's not in the proposal that we have.
Correct. They did not make any changes
So we
for
need to add
that.
that as a
Condition.
condition.
Correct.
If you want it to be white, I'm not sure if it's white. I'm not sure. Like I said, they did not provide me with any information before this meeting.
And we can discuss with the applicant after this part, but,
Yeah.
Any other comments, questions for staff?
For staff, I think I'm going to go back to trying to adjust the setback on the west side. Whatever we can do to decrease the width of the driveways. I mean, if the driveway is going to be the same width as Groveport Road. that's-
Wider than Groveport Road.
Yeah, I don't know about you, that sounds like it's about 50% too wide. So I think decreasing that would allow the building to slide a little bit to the east. I still think the alignment is a bit of a, I mean, why did we align it with the other entrance? If you pick one, and I know why we did, it was the better one to pick.
So the challenge, Mr. Deeds, with sliding the building to the east is the variance you approved did not allow the building to slide any more than 1.6 feet to the east.
I guess I'm going to be a little bit upset because I specifically asked that question.
So the variance was approved as presented. There were no conditions. So the motion was made by Ms. Gooden, second by Ms. McDonald, to approve the variance as presented. There was no conditions tied to that. So they asked for approval for a 70.
Yeah, I understand what they asked for,
73.3
and I understand.
or 17.
I think we specifically talked about a condition related to that.
You
felt
could
like
have
at the
had one,
time-
but yeah, there wasn't one tied to it. So the building can't shift unless the applicant reapplies for a new variance. If it reduces a setback more than what was approved.
Right.
Can we go back and change that?
I would say we are past that this evening on the agenda, and I'm not sure how we can go back 2 applications to something
And,
that was previously discussed.
and Mr. Deeds, I think what you're potentially might be getting to here is, so if the building itself stayed where it was, but we decreased that west driveway a certain amount to give a little bit more relief to the western parcel owner, It wouldn't be significant, but, it might be, what's the width of that road? It might be,
Right, to go half and half, that's roughly 12 feet the building can move to
yeah,
the
it
east.
could be 8 to 10 feet.
Yeah, so the building can move to the east, let's say, well, almost 12 foot, and then the westward drive can move east almost
So-
20 foot because we make it half the size.
So Mr. Moore, or Mr. Hare, if, through the technical review process, could just the driveway, the western, I don't know if that'll be in or out, could it go from 24 feet to, let's just say, 16 feet or 15 feet without, interrupting the rest of the project?
Yes.
Yes.
And so both driveways are 24 feet as proposed in this site development plan application, but the applicant did say in one of their updated rendering, one of the things they talked about was a one-way pattern around the property.
It's shown as
It
one-way
is
now.
one-way.
And so, what's the width of Groveport Road?
23 feet,
Okay.
face to face.
Okay. So that could be a discussion with the applicant.
I guess that's still, yes, it basically keeps the east and allows the west to move slightly. Yeah.
Because you're not moving the building. You're only moving this, you're only shrinking the side of the
Well,
driveways.
I'd like, but the building could move all of like 8 foot, 10 foot, right? And then that way it allows, so you get 8
The
foot.
building
No
can't
building.
move.
Huh?
The access drives can get narrower to
Yes.
increase the distance of the access drive from the property line, but the building can't move.
Based on the variance we approved.
The
for-
building can shift 1 foot one direction or the other. It can't move 8 or 10 feet because of the specifics that the applicant applied for their variance.
Any further discussion with staff? Bring the applicant up. Anything staff wishes to add before we address the applicant? Okay, please.
I just want to clarify in case it wasn't clear, the library is actually in agreement to reduce the width of the one-way system if it's possible. My understanding is that that's a requirement from the fire department. So if the fire department allows us to reduce that one-way system, we would certainly do that.
Right, I could see in some of the turning areas where it could very well be wider, for that, but really? So we're basically saying that Groveport Road isn't wide enough for fire equipment?
Their Madison Township's requirements are to have 26 feet clear that they can put their outriggers out.
So I have a question for the applicant regarding the landscaping and the buffer around the western elevation. And I would be, of my personal opinion, if we make this a condition of this application, to let them work with staff on what's appropriate, so that we aren't tying them to something specific. But I do think, the library being a good steward of the community and us being a good steward of the library and all those things, that they are willing to work with us and the city, as well as, the property owners that surround them, especially to the west, because that's the closest where their project will be. And so I don't know if anybody has anything specific in mind on the board, but, I do think some sort of natural landscape and/or a fence of some sort would probably be something that would make the project a little bit more, that there would be a little bit more privacy for the property owner that's immediately to the west.
If maybe you follow that theme of the brick wall that's capped, not make it like just a hard straight brick wall all the way, but think of ways you could do that, so someone's turning in, the headlights at that, as opposed to, that way it kind of ties in with what's happening to the other side, without creating we don't want a 100-foot brick wall, but, maybe a couple of well staggered might achieve that cohesiveness and still provide a little more screening with it.
I think the short answer is yes, we would welcome conversations with staff to kind of finalize and enhance, particularly the west landscaping, with more discussion to be had at staff level. And we could certainly share visual updates informally with the commission.
And just for for clarification, when I go back to the landscape plan, and I believe the real little, go back, Mr. Moore, I believe the real little, can you go back one slide? There's a shed on the property owner to the west, I believe it's almost right on the property line.
Correct.
So right there. And I believe now, there are, I don't believe there's any large trees there, but there's some brush and overgrown grass and that sort of thing. We don't intend to necessarily change that grading with the project per se. I mean, I don't think it's significant when I look at the plan, but would there be an opportunity there to potentially save any of what you're proposing removing? Or, you know, again, that's something maybe you could work with staff on, but there
Yeah,
appears to be some things there now that
Yeah,
might.
and I think we, you know, like so many property lines, I think there's a lot of things that just find themselves growing, that I think we'd want to talk to both staff and the neighbor to understand what would be welcome to stay and what should have go away anyway. But I think that would be, if acceptable to the commission and the conversation, I think if we can make that a condition, that we would have that at the staff level, and then keeping or modifying or adding landscaping. We're very much in support of that.
Based on the renderings that you showed us tonight, it seemed to me the two major changes were the lighting on the building and the white trim.
Correct.
Are those things that you would want as conditions in this development plan? Because otherwise, as I understand it from Andrew, you can't make those changes.
Well, it's our intent to lighten the trim from what was originally presented. It's true that I have not submitted a physical sample. So if the language could be written that it will be lighter for final approval to be submitted, that would actually help our process. Again, because of the holidays, we haven't finalized that with the library, other than just saying in rendering form, we like the idea of lightening the building in the way it was shown. So I think the other thing that was mentioned was the landscape walls, which hadn't been specifically shown.
And the lighting.
And the lighting, right. Lighting, trim, landscape walls.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to offer my comments on the roadway and the west end.
Please.
And what Mr. Allen has shared with us today. When I look at this site plan, there are a couple things that I see that I would like mitigated. One is the size of the road tends to produce a faster traffic. So when they're coming in, it's faster. It's like a roadway, a runway, if you will. And if we could make that a little bit smaller so that the sound of the traffic coming into the library is reduced because the speed of the vehicles is less. That's the first thing. The second thing is the light from the cars that are turning in and how that's going to be reflected. I think there are great solutions using landscaping and other solutions that staff could work with the applicant on in order to try to mitigate as much as that light pollution of the cars turning in to the area. I am concerned about the fire department's regulations. And again, I think those are items that can be discussed with the fire department based on the apparatus that is in this area serving this community and the likelihood that they would need to stage and do their outrigging for fighting a fire along that way. If we reduce the road from the 23 foot down to, say, 15 feet, it does save some of the vegetation that they would have otherwise taken out and some of the old growth, which I think is important for our city as well, and then the addition of some additional landscaping. I do see why Mr. Allen is concerned, but I do think there's ways that the staff could work on a solution with the applicant to mitigate some of those things. And I do support reducing the entranceway, maybe not so much the exit, but even the exit will create some sort of a quick-moving, fast-moving traffic. People want to get out of there really fast, and that does concern me when we, excuse me, when we get to Groveport Road. But I do think there's a solution without physically moving the building. I think if we're reducing that and giving it more vegetation and more boundaries, from my perspective, would be helpful.
Thank you. So some of the conditions that we're talking about potentially adding to this recommendation would be landscaping on the west elevation to be handled through the applicant and the staff, and with the engagement of the property owner to the west and some input from the property owner to the west. I don't know if we want to put anything in there about the lighter trim color, but that's something that was discussed and proposed by the applicant. And again, it was not submitted in the packet. However, it's something that they spoke about this evening. And then the big topic, at least on this particular application right now, would just be the decreasing the width of the driveways on both sides, and maybe just the west elevation or both. But that, again, Mr. Moore would be done, if staff has control of that through the technical review process and review by the fire department, and, the answer might be no. It needs to stay where it is. So if we put that in as a condition and the fire department comes back and says it needs to be this amount, do they need, I'm trying to, so the applicant doesn't have to come back before us to.
There are other routes that we could look at with the fire department versus the 26-foot width as strictly pavement. So if the concern is vehicular access drives, I think if there's a reduction in mind, that's something, we can look at with the fire department. I don't foresee that being an issue.
Yeah, I did share the plans with them. They didn't provide any comments on them, but I did provide them the plans. Generally, in this scenario, having access to 3 sides of the building is going to be enough. And so as long, if we've reduced one driveway, based on the size of the building where a fire department connection point is likely to be, where their sprinkler room is going to be, it looks like that, the west drive would be the appropriate drive to narrow and still meet the Ohio Fire Code requirements for access.
Okay. So again, that's up to us, if we want to make that a condition or if we want to lean on staff to make the right decision with the fire department through that process. Those were the 3 points that we discussed. So I have no further questions or comments. Is there anybody else has any other additional questions for staff or comments?
Clear to the 3 that you think you've got there. You're talking about the driveways, landscaping, and changes as they were presented by the applicant?
Yeah, color schemes. They did talk about the capped brick landscape wall, but again, those things can change based on what they've provided. So they have provided us, Mr. Willenthal, with a packet that does not have those, but they discussed those this evening. And so if we like that, or we want to see that, then that is something that we could make as a condition as part of this recommendation.
Yeah, I would just say, as you consider conditions, we're going to need some guidance on what those conditions entail.
Yeah, and that's.
So just saying a fence doesn't get us anywhere. We're going to need more guidance on where that fence needs to be located and what materials that fence needs to be, and potentially a height of the fence.
I would say
And the same with the driveway width. That'd be helpful to specify a width as well.
I think staff is, I'm concerned about an arbitrary trim color, it's lighter than what was presented in the packet.
Yeah, I think they have the color, if we want to specify that, if they want to.
Yeah, if there's a name to what they have tonight, that would be very helpful. But just saying lighter could,
There's also the presentation, we changed the color responsive to comments from last month. There's the option of leaving it as presented, which is the color that was submitted as presented last time, which is this one.
So what is the color that is presented this evening?
Well, I'm unused to sort of, honestly, we haven't selected a specific final material other than recommending that we wanted to change the color, and we are still exploring manufacturers, but
Okay.
we weren't able to get final samples given the holidays in time for this meeting, so.
Okay.
A weird little tension between having exact specificity with a genuine intent to try to improve based on comments.
And do you want to vote on the site development plan application this evening? Would you guys like a vote, or
I think,
the only other option would be to table?
speaking
I
on
mean,
behalf
you
of the
could-
library, absolutely.
You could delay the metal color selection, that's not going to delay their plan, and they could return for a selection of a metal color, if that's the concern.
Yeah, I mean, I personally don't have a deep concern over the color. I'm specifically just stating that these are the things the applicant has come with us this evening, and with changes to what was presented by staff. So can we, so, my personal opinion would be, I don't know that we need on the west elevation a fence, but I do think natural landscaping buffers, through vegetation and other things would be appropriate. I don't know how the rest of the commission feels about a fence or some sort of more man-made structure there, but I think I'm of the opinion that, that the applicant can work with staff and the property owner to the west, to what's appropriate from a natural vegetation and plantings.
I like that.
Yeah, the only concern is, I'd be like it to be viable day one and not year 6, right? So we don't want to plant things that'll have to grow up before they actually serve the purpose. So our landscaping plan is put in place, it'd be nice for it to be, effective day one, or, within the first 6, 12 months.
And again, we need to be, so,
And how opaque, and what's the average height
I think
at
that's something
planting?
I think the property owner next door, right? We don't get too crazy with that, but you sometimes see them, they plant the 6-inch boxwoods and come back in 20 years and they'll be effective.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking for more specific.
yeah, so we need to be specific for staff if we include this in our.
Well, I think that's where the property owner, is it okay to have the property owner next door help out? Right, if they see the 6-inch proposal, they ought to say,
the challenge, Mr. Deeds, would be, how would I ever know the property owner next door liked it or agreed to it? It becomes arbitrary at that point. It becomes, they could come to me tomorrow with a plan and say, yep,
Yep.
he agreed to it, and it gets constructed. So those details tonight, of you want plants that will be a minimum of X feet tall at planting, and then if you don't care what kind of plants they are, would be very helpful.
And then
That's,
how frequent do they need to be, or how opaque do you want it to be?
yeah, without seeing something on paper, there's really nothing being committed to without those details.
That's why a fence is, it's there, it's 6 feet tall. It's 100% opaque.
right,
Or we could say, it has to be 5 feet at the time of planting, or 4 feet at the time of planting. And then it could grow up to be like the screening at the swimming pool parking lot, and the north side of that parking lot is 20 feet tall.
right.
But it's only gonna be 4 or 5 feet tall the time they plant it, because you can't buy material
Yeah,
that's taller than that.
right.
So can you go back a couple slides, Mr. Moore, where shows the driveway and so we're talking about, what's the distance between the right-of-way, so the entry point to the western driveway and just beyond the shed there, so just
If there is any.
about halfway
fence-
down that driveway.
So if there's any fencing that you guys want to discuss, it would have to be set back as far away from the road as the building.
Just from a code perspective, that's what's required.
Which is 30 feet, 32 feet?
Yeah, about 31 feet was how close the fence could get to the road.
And it's about 55 feet from the front corner of the house to the front corner of the shed.
Okay.
Is it something like the color of the metal? That's something that they come back with? I mean, because I'm sensing there's a little bit of, how specific can we be? Is it something we just have them come back on?
So I think a 6-foot natural wood type fence, similar to what you see along the bike path by Brewdog or somewhere like that, or a natural wood fence. What's the term? It's got 3,
It's trimmed out, like the screening walls we have out here
Yeah.
around the landscaping.
yeah, for roughly a section of 55 feet from the right-of-way to just beyond the shed to protect, the parcel owner to the west, and then natural landscaping on either or both sides of that, with staff's discretion. I don't know if 6 feet's tall enough, or if that's too tall, but, it seems to me that, that would decrease some of the pollution of cars turning in. It gives physical privacy. Now, if it doesn't go all, it wouldn't go all the way down. But that's something that's tangible that staff can work with the applicant on and the property owner.
So 6 feet would be the tallest the fence could be based off of its zoning?
Okay. And there's no specific requirement for materials, but we could say, like a natural wood fence, not a privacy style fence, but
So you're talking a agricultural horizontal slat
yeah.
that's open?
It's just that's what's coming to my mind, and then staggered vegetation along.
I guess,
I mean, I'm thinking from the applicant's perspective, just maintaining and durability and longevity. And I don't want to tie either side to,
no, he's talking about the
Like what they do.
pedestrian railing along the bike path where it's the 2x10s that are, I guess,
I could offer something on behalf of the applicant.
Yeah,
That's
please.
acceptable. We were talking about a 6-foot landscape buffer, arborvitae, as an example, 6 feet along the property line from the property line to the shed that must be touching each other within 1 year as a consistent landscape screen. Would that be acceptable as a way of defining? I think there was some preference for landscape. So offering that as a way
Yeah.
forward for.
I mean, I like
Having a
the natural plantings. Mr. Deed said, I think it's just being effective from day one, with the project.
Yeah, well, I mean, touching within a year, I think is a reasonable as well. I just didn't want it to be 10, 20 years.
Okay. So in our recommendation, in our vote, our recommendation, do we have any conditions that we're gonna? We've got the landscape, and we've got the western roadway in. So we need to be specific on what we think that should be in terms of width, so that staff has something to work with.
I recommend 15 feet,
Subject to approval by the fire department.
subject to the approval of the fire department. And the reason I picked 15 feet is that a current roadway is 12. So if you think about a modern roadway at 12, this would be a little bit bigger than that at 15, but it's not the full width of Groveport Road, which is a highway.
Agree.
I know, I'm concerned that.
Staff, is there any other comments or?
The only comment I have is in regards to landscaping. If it would be preferable to not specify something specific, because we would have to evaluate the plant if it meets our maximum genus requirement in our code, and the arborvitae that the applicant mentioned at a very rough level could exceed the amount they're already planting, and then creates a whole issue where they have to find new trees to plant elsewhere. I guess a type and height is better than saying exactly what it is for that instance. Again, it's changing too many details of the plan, in my opinion, means the plan needs to come back, because you don't know what else it's affecting. Being precise but more arbitrary for things could be helpful, I guess, is just guidance on the conditions you have here this evening. Because it looks like it's landscaping, building materials, and access drive widths, which are all parts of the plan that affect everything, so.
Well, okay, but, yeah. So you're saying something more like X foot landscape is going to be better than saying 6 foot arborvitae's?
Yes.
So 6 foot landscaping?
I would say a 6 foot landscaping
All right.
is easier for staff to figure out with the applicant
Okay.
administratively.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if we want to talk about building materials or if that's something we just want them to work through. They don't have those picked, so, can we put something subjective in our motion that if it's mild,
You can say to have, if you want them to come back
just for the color scheme?
for colors, then that's something that they can come back to a future meeting and have a minor site plan approval for that, and right now you're not approving any colors.
So that would be a modification to the site development plan at that point?
It could be, yeah.
Okay. All right.
Would it be appropriate to add the building accent lighting to that
Yes.
further?
That is that the entranceway and around the,
Correct. And the accent lighting around the metal panel as it hits the glass.
So we could group that together, and they would just work with staff and then come back before us for that modification of the building materials and the
oh,
lighting.
okay, materials and lighting, okay.
Does anybody care to make a motion if there's no further comments?
I'll take a stab at it. I move that we approve site development plan 23009 with the following conditions. That the applicant be required to plant at least a 6-foot natural plant barrier on the west side of the property, from the front of the neighboring house to at least the back of the south end of the shed. And that the applicant work with staff on what type of landscaping be planted. And that the condition that they work with staff and the fire department to attempt to reduce the west road route width to 15 feet.
And come back,
Can I offer some input here? Can I request?
Not right now, sir.
Let me know when, please.
Okay.
And that any other changes be subject to a modification request at a later date.
Okay, say that last part.
And that any other changes as to color or lighting be part of a modification request at a later date.
So any other building materials and lighting changes?
So to confirm it's approving what's on the screen right here as presented, and if they want to come back and change it, they can at a future date.
I think we were expecting him to come back with the final color selection at another
The
date.
wording was
Then
different.
you would want to make an exception for the metal
Yeah, not
material
approving
colors.
building materials and those need to come back is different than if they want to make changes to come back. So that's why I wanted to be clear.
Yes.
So can we
Okay, I'm
say
not
that
sure where
part.
we're going with that.
Do you want them to come back with changes, or do you want to give them the option to come back with changes?
I think it's the option. Or personally, I think it's the option. I don't know what the rest of the commission feels.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. So in terms of building materials, we're approving what's presented by staff this evening and giving the applicant the option to come back for a site development plan modification for building materials, lighting, and colors. Okay.
Correct.
Second,
We didn't mention the landscaping wall. Is
we
that,
did,
Landscaping wall was
lancing
not.
material.
And that was not in the
the
application? That's something that, so if that's something we want to add in there, or, again, that's something that they can come back for, or we approve it without. And I'm sorry, who made the motion was made by Ms. Gooden, and the second
Me.
is opened by Ms. McDonald. Okay, so the motion on the floor is that site development plan SDP 23-009 be approved as presented with the conditions of a 6-foot natural plant barrier from the front elevation to the rear of the shed of the adjoining property to the west, and the applicant work with staff on specific plantings that meet that requirement. And then the second condition is to reduce the western
Entry.
driveway and entrance width from 24 feet to 15 feet, pending fire department approval. And then any other building materials, changes to building materials, the applicant, and/or lighting, the applicant has the option to come back for a modification to the site development plan. Are those captured accurately?
Well stated.
Okay, so motion was made by Ms. Gooden, second by Ms. McDonald. Any other further discussion?
the only thing I'm going to say is give them the option, they will not make the change. So if we want the lighting, if you want to review the colors, we need to say we want
Yeah.
to have that visit. And I prefer to have the visit.
And to second that, saying, give them the option to come back, it doesn't need to be a condition then. It's approved as presented, which is right here on the screen, if it's an option. If it's a requirement, then it needs to be a condition of approval.
So we can take out the third point.
If it's not a requirement, correct?
If the commission believes that it's not a requirement for them to change the color or the lighting, and if they decide they want to do that, they can come back for the modification. That makes sense.
I kind of liked what was presented here this evening, so I would like to see them come back.
It's included in the motion that was presented and seconded. I think we should keep it in there.
So we should probably restate it, because it says after any changes to building materials and the options to come back, gives them the option to come back. So if we like that, then we need to say that we need to be more specific in not giving them the option.
Correct. So either we require them to come back or we take it out.
Right.
And what are we doing? Do we want to require them to come back, or do we want to leave it up to them that if they wish to change, they come back? Because that was not in the application this evening.
I've stated my opinion.
I don't have a problem with the colors as presented. I thought from the way they presented it tonight, they wanted to make a change.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing that as an option for them to come back.
Okay. Roll call.
Mr. Wildenthaler,
Yes.
Mr. Donahue,
Yes.
Ms. Gooden,
Yes.
Ms. McDonald,
Yes.
Mr. Deeds, no. Mr. Pelsgrove.
Yes.
Okay, so the site development plan is approved.
In terms of other old and new business, I don't don't know if I really have anything.
We did have an appeal filed on behalf of Jovino of their sign variance. So council has yet to set the date for that public hearing, but we'll let you know when that date and time is set. So we will circulate a finding of facts and conclusions of law, and we'll need to get your signatures on that.
And was that appealed by the applicant?
Yes.
The tentative date.
It's
this
the first
isn't-
meeting in February.
Yeah, this isn't confirmed, but the tentative date is February 5th.
Okay. Any other old or new business?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Motion made by Ms. McDonald, second by Mr. Paulsgrove. Roll call?
Mr. Woldenthaler?
Yes.
Mr. Donahue?
Yes.
Ms. Gooden?
Yes.
Ms. McDonald?
Yes.
Mr. Deeds, yes. Mr. Paulsgrove?
Yes.
Timeout, 9:00 PM.